Even though things look like they are going well, the Chinese economy is about to crash. People can see that there is good growth in the numbers, but the truth is much more complicated. The policies that President Xi Jinping has put in place are slowly hurting the economy, even though he is in charge of the country. Even though it might look like China's economy is doing well, it really isn't. But cracks are starting to show up below the surface. Xi, the leader who seems soft, is slowly but surely getting to the heart of the economy, even though he doesn't mean to. It's possible that what he did will bring down the economy of the whole country. One question that could be asked is why the country is failing while he is in charge. Shouldn't he be seen as the leader of the country and the architect of its armed power? A few words that don't seem very important can be used to say it: centralized power. Official sources in Beijing are calling 2023's 5.2% growth rate a huge win, especially since 2022 wasn't very good. Xi Jinping might even feel a little proud of himself for beating the US. There is one important fact that Beijing conveniently leaves out, though. They invest 40% of their GDP every year, which is twice as much as the US. Some experts say that the 5.2% growth doesn't look as good as it really is because of all this spending. So the number might not be a sign of how well Xi is leading. Instead, it could just be a way for him to boost his own ego and hide bigger problems. This shows how centralized power can't do everything. Xi has made it his goal to strengthen control ever since he took power. Everything important in China is now directly controlled by the so-called president, who has a very tight grip on the country's economic policies. This method is very different from China's usual ways of doing things. Instead of depending on the nation's past system of making decisions as a whole, Xi has worked hard to consolidate power, combining the Chinese government with the ruling Communist Party. How he treated China's premier, who is the second highest figure in the government, is a clear sign of this change in power. The premier used to be in charge of the country's economic strategies before Xi took over. In this setup, the Prime Minister consulted with a group of experts, and the policy's success depended a lot on the quality of the experts who were involved. In the past, the president's part in economic issues was mostly symbolic. Usually, the president would talk about the policies that the minister and his team came up with, while also focusing on China's bigger strategic goals. That relationship, however, changed a lot under Xi. As soon as Xi took office, he decided that China's economic policy needed to change. He wanted to focus on security and common prosperity. His goal was to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots so that more Chinese people could share in the country's wealth, which is a good goal. Xi, his minister, and the group of economic experts who used to make policy quickly lost trust in each other because of this change. Because Xi didn't like the ideas and plans they came up with, he slowly took away their power and took control himself. By doing this, he turned himself into a one-man expert team who had to answer to no one but himself for economic policy decisions. Experts say that the result is China's economy being almost completely disorganized, which is often hard to see from the official numbers coming from Beijing. The Hong Kong University of Science and Technology's Carsten Holtz, an expert on the Chinese economy, says that Xi's policies have made it harder to understand how the Chinese economy really works. With worries like an over-indebted property sector and commercial banks with questionable loan books, he paints a picture of a system that is very chaotic on the inside, even though it seems strong on the outside. China's National Financial Regulatory Administration, NFRA, is a great example of how Xi is at the center of all this chaos. NFRA seems like a good idea at first glance. CNN says that the creation of this new agency in March 2023, which will replace the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission, CBIRC, is the most significant government overhaul in decades. It is planned that the NFRA will work like the SEC does in the US. Its main jobs will include protecting the rights of investors and consumers in the financial sector and keeping an eye on the central bank. But there's a catch. The NFRA is a good example of how state and Communist Party ideas can mix. If you look more closely, you can see that Li Yunzi is in charge. He used to work as an official at China Construction Bank and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. In 2018, he was named deputy governor of Sichuan. Li is a member of the Communist Party, which means that she controls what he does, even though he is very good with money. This situation is explained by the Financial Times, which says that the NFRA's creation is the latest sign of how Xi is trying to govern through special CCP organs, over which he can more easily assert influence. Once more, the method from the centralized is being used. Some problems existed with the CBRs, mostly related to corruption, but it was still a government agency and not a direct part of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. Establishing the NFRA, Xi Jinping seems determined to fix the issues that bedeviled the CBIRC, while also making a new organization that he can control even more tightly. Xi wants to improve his control over Beijing's financial sector, so he's cracking down on corruption and speculation. Although things aren't perfect in real life, there are many examples of how his economic plans have failed. Consider China's new law against spying. A quick look might not reveal anything directly connected to the economy, but this law makes people worry about how foreign companies do consulting work in China's security sector and how investors handle business information. When this rule was first passed, China fined the American investment firm Mintz Group a huge $1.5 million. Why? Carrying out unapproved statistical work. Any investment firm would do this unapproved job. After all, research is very important before investors decide to put money into something. Xi, on the other hand, has made it very clear that foreign investors should only trust the data China gives them, with Beijing acting as a gatekeeper. This lets Xi hide any economic red flags that might make investors not want to spend. It's all about having power. As a punishment for supposedly breaking the law, and because China claimed illegal proceeds from Mintz Group, the $1.5 million fine was a mix of the two. This could be seen as a way to force the American company to do something. The raid on Mintz Group made it clear to other investment firms that any money made in China, especially if it was tried to be moved out of China, could be at risk under Xi's new spy rules. The method has a reason for being. Like many of Xi's strategies, he thinks that leaving money in China by foreign companies is one of the main problems with the country's economy. He isn't completely wrong either. Foreign long-term investments worth about 1% of China's GDP left the country in just the fourth quarter of 2023, amounting to about $140 billion. Even 10 years ago, China was getting foreign investment equal to 2% of its GDP, which shows how serious this problem is, according to Chatham House. For some reason, Xi really doesn't want the money to leave. He wants it to keep coming in. It's possible that his plan to use anti-espionage laws to get money back from foreign investors will not work out that well. It's scary for investors now. They no longer see China as a promising place to make money, which would make them want to invest in its economy. Instead, they see it as a risk, a place where they could be punished for doing the necessary research. There is a communist totalitarianism going on, says Chenggang Xu, a senior research scholar at Stanford Center who studies China's economy and organizations. The goal seems to be for the CCP to control all parts of China's economy, from the government agencies that oversee it to private businesses, even foreign companies that have invested in China for a long time. Xu also says that Xi's desire to be in charge might mean that these foreign companies are wiped out, not because they aren't important, but because they don't want to be controlled as much as the CCP wants them to be. Basically, Xi is removing his nose to make himself look worse. As he tries to keep everything under tight control, he turns off the foreign investors who have helped make China an economic powerhouse in the 21st century. So, China is looking ahead to a time when foreign capital might not be as easy to come by. Let us now look at the real estate market. The real estate market in China was a big part of its economic growth for many years. There would always be people buying homes from builders as long as the population kept growing. The real estate market not only gave millions of people working in construction, but it also gave the growing middle class a way to save and grow their money. Beijing was happy to support this growth. Besides the investors, local governments also made a lot of money by selling land to them. There is a catch, though, to being so dependent on real estate. Bad things can happen when the real estate bubble crashes. Because families relied so much on real estate, the average family had about 70% of their funds locked up in property. This made them very dependent on how well the industry did. When home prices went up, everything looked good. People and the business as a whole felt the pain when prices started to drop. The economic slump began in 2021. Bloomberg says that in more than half of China's Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, home prices fell by at least 15% from their peak between 2021 and 2023. For some background, a 5% drop in China's home prices equals a loss of 19 trillion yuan, which is about 2.7 trillion in home equity. A 15% drop is the same as losing just over $8 trillion almost right away. Xi's measures in the property sector are the main cause of these huge losses. Xi Jinping took over a lot of China's real estate problems. The sector had been an important part of China's economy long before he became president, and he at first let it stay that way. However, about 7 years into his presidency, Xi cracked down on the real estate growth market in an effort to stop developers from taking on too much debt. For example, in 2018, the Chinese real estate market was very unstable. Bloomberg says that in China, real estate made up almost 20% of the country's GDP, but only employed 2% of the workers. Most of the 16 million people who worked in the industry were migrant workers who spent long hours on building sites for low pay. They were building houses that they would never be able to buy, while those at the top made a lot of money off of their work. Some might say this is a part of business, but it's not exactly a way to make the economy grow. If workers in an important area are having a hard time making ends meet, you can't expect them to make a big difference in the growth of the economy. While Xi did admit that graft was a problem that he had allowed to get worse, he also took steps to fix it. Hui Kayan, the head of China Evergrande Group, was investigated, which makes this clear. 3 years later, after Evergrande stopped paying on a lot of dollar notes, Kayan was looked at more closely. By that time, he was China's richest man. But it was too late for Xi's crackdown on the building industry. Bloomberg calls the way real estate developers worked under Xi's rule a pre-sales model. People could buy apartments up to 2 years before they were ready, which gave developers early running cash. The idea was simple. Investors put down payments and mortgages into escrow accounts to get this money, which developers used to start building and finish the houses. Real estate prices were going up so fast that many Chinese people couldn't afford to buy their own homes, but the model urged progress to keep going. The plan went horribly wrong very quickly. Around 10 times as much unfinished floor space had been added to residential building projects by 2020, when Xi's crackdowns finally started to happen. Because these crackdowns slowed down building, many companies lost money and couldn't finish the homes they had already sold to customers. By 2023, the number was shocking: 18 unfinished homes for everyone that was finished. We have a mess with our money right now. Some might even say that Xi was not interested in the changes that were happening at the time, which let companies work without being stopped. This caused property values to rise for the middle and upper classes, while the average person was priced out of the market. A lot of China is now going through a growth crisis. The affordable homes that were supposed to come up aren't happening, and property prices are falling so fast that buyers are losing a lot of money. Bloomberg says that the market drop could affect more than 5 million jobs, which is a very scary thought, because developers are becoming less likely to start new projects or finish old ones. Migrant workers who count on construction jobs for their income may be in a very bad situation. It affects a lot more than just these people. Chinese companies are not paying back loans because they have so much debt that they can't handle it. For example, Country Garden Holdings Company used to be one of the biggest developers in China by sales, but now it has a huge $200 billion shortfall, half of which is due to buildings that have already been sold. It doesn't look like this loan will be paid off anytime soon. This puts at risk not only the people who bought these unfinished homes, but also China's state-owned banks, which are involved in this debt because they gave out credit. When you add in late loan payments, the banking sector is facing a big problem because of loans that may not have been given in the first place. It is clear that China needs to depend less on real estate, and Xi supports the idea that housing is to be lived in, not speculated on. However, his policies have caused big problems for many groups in China, including regular people, investors, banks, and the middle class. The idea that housing should be used for living instead of investment is only useful while the housing is being built. However, China is worried about more than just its property. Also, the production sector is having a lot of problems, which fits with Xi's rule. China was praised as the world's manufacturing hub when Xi took office. The manufacturing sector made up 31% of the country's GDP, more than the real estate business. This share had dropped to just 26% by 2020, and it is still somewhere between 27% and 28% in 2023. The winds of change have blown through the manufacturing world, and China has been hit hard by a stiff breeze from somewhere it didn't expect. China used to be the clear leader in low-cost production, but Vietnam and Mexico have become strong competitors for the top spot in manufacturing. Foreign investors have left because these rising stars have promised lower prices and a better business environment. But China's manufacturing power may have been hit the hardest by things that happened inside the country. The big Made in China 2025 plan, which was started by Xi Jinping in 2015, was meant to turn China from a factory floor into a high-tech giant. Even though the goal was good, this strategy has caused problems that have made China less competitive in the global market. China's big plan to change the way factories work was a risky bet. The plan was easy to understand: move away from low-cost output and toward manufacturing that is driven by innovation. People thought that China could become a world winner in high-value goods, which would bring in new investors and help its economy. But things were not what they seemed to be. The Made in China 2025 plan was supposed to take China to a whole new level of technology, but it ended up driving away foreign investors. What was supposed to be a huge step forward turned out to be a huge step backward, as many companies looked for better places to set up operations. Investors are also turned off by China's plans to become a manufacturing leader in 2023, which is similar to Xi's anti-espionage laws. Furthermore, this strategy had such a big effect on other countries that it led to the trade war that lasted most of Donald Trump's presidency. Supporting companies that Xi thought could help China's manufacturing sector was part of his plan. So far, Beijing has not said which companies have gotten these subsidies, according to the Center for Economic Policy Research, CEPR. However, the specifics of how the CCP is helping some Chinese manufacturers are still a secret. This is another example of how Xi's top-down economic method is making things hard for China. While China had good intentions with its big factory plan, it turned out to be a bit of a boomerang. The Made in China 2025 plan didn't help Chinese businesses. Instead, it caused China's trading partners to put trade restrictions and tariffs in place. China is having a hard time with its economy because of Xi's strikes. Its once dominant manufacturing sector has been hit hard. There have been many effects. China's property and manufacturing sectors have been hurt by Xi's centralized method. Foreign investors have also fled the country, leaving it feeling alone and in need of a financial lifeline. And the damage isn't just happening on the world stage. Xi's actions are also making things worse in China. Xi's crackdowns on the housing market in 2020 made it harder for regional governments to pay their bills. Before the crackdowns, land sales brought in about a third of the money that the local government needed. By 2022, this had dropped to about 10%, because investors who were having trouble making ends meet could no longer afford to buy land. Meanwhile, China's National Bureau of Statistics says that by 2022, 86% of all local government spending will have been taken care of. It's not just Xi's fault that local governments are having a hard time with money. Since the changes to the tax-sharing system in 1994, local governments have had to deal with more money problems. Before the change, more than 75% of China's income went to local governments. By 1994, their share had dropped below 50%. It has slightly gone up since Xi took power, but it is still a problem because they are responsible for a lot of spending. Most of the time, Xi has ignored these money problems, which puts local governments in a tough spot. The way Xi handles local government funding has indeed made things risky. During his first term, he paid off 12 trillion yuan, $167 billion in local government financing vehicle LGFV debt. By 2022, the total amount owed had grown to 57 trillion yuan, 7,992 trillion. This is almost 48% of China's GDP, which is almost the same amount that the country borrows. The country is having a harder time paying its debts as the ratio of debt to GDP went up from 200% to 360% during Xi's rule. Xi has made local governments' financial problems worse by taking away a key source of income. The comparison between dirty shovels and purse strings shows how unfair it is that local governments have to deal with money problems while Beijing decides on policy and funds. This mismatch has been kept going by Xi's policies, which has made it harder for smaller cities and towns across China to make ends meet. Even though Xi has policies that are supposed to make the spread of wealth more fair, his big goal of reducing wealth inequality in China doesn't seem to be coming true. The growing gap in income The richest 20% of urban families make 6.3 times more than the poorest 20%, shows how far apart China's wealthy and poor are getting. China's economic problems, such as a real estate market that isn't doing well and a factory sector that isn't doing well, have big effects on its economy and on the world. The high rate of unemployment among young people is another sign of how bad things are for China's economy. The bigger picture of these problems is that they have an effect on trade, business, and the way countries deal with each other's economies. China's customer market is shrinking because of Xi's bad policy choices. This is a big worry for global companies like Apple that sell to Chinese customers because it means less money coming in from China. When these big players make less money, there is less demand for their products, which affects thousands of other companies that are connected to them. That is why Xi's economic mistakes are bad news for more than just jobs and the security of China's economy. They also make things hard for many foreign companies that have relied on Chinese customers for a long time to make money. So, the important question still stands. Is there any hope for Xi Jinping's economic plan? In China, family deposits now exceed the country's GDP, which is a good thing for Xi. This trend can be linked back to the stock market crash of 2015, which happened while Xi was in power and made many Chinese people save money instead of investing it. These saves give state-owned banks a cheap way to get money that they can use to lend to high-end manufacturing companies. In fact, loans to these companies have gone through the roof because of Xi's Made in China 2025 plan. But can this small win make up for the bigger problems in the economy? It's possible that Xi is the only one who knows. He seems to think he knows how to fix every problem China is having after all. Do people worry too much about China's economic problems? Maybe Xi is just biding his time while he works on a big plan. Or are we just seeing a totalitarian leader put a lot of stress on his people and the economy to further the power of his party?